In this video, I'm going to be talking about plotting in MATLAB. We're going to be starting with a simple data set. Here I've put some temperature data into a few arrays, so that way we can go ahead and plot some lines. Before we start plotting, let's look at my data. So it's important to pay attention to our units. One of my temperatures is in degrees Fahrenheit and another one of my locations is in degrees Celsius. So the first thing I need to do is convert all of my data to either degrees Fahrenheit or degrees Celsius. Let's start out with just plotting one line. So first I just want to see one temperature over the course of 7 days. Remember when using the plot function, the first input argument is your independent variable x, and your second input argument is y, your dependent variable. In this case, days is my independent variable and temperature is my dependent variable. Now that I've plotted one of my temperatures for across the 7 days, I want to go ahead and add my second temperature. A lot of times I see people get tempted to think that they have the same independent variable, so they can just say x comma y comma the next y. Well, that's not the case. It won't work. So we have to put the independent variable comma the dependent and then repeat the same independent variable then the next dependent variable. This is one approach to plotting both of those lines. I can also approach it by putting both those lines separately. So I can say plot days max temp and then days min temp in my next plot. If I do this, it's important to keep in mind that it's only going to be displaying my most recent plot unless I explicitly say hold on. So it's important that I put hold on after my first plot if I want to display all the lines on the same plot. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the way I previously had it, and then I'm going to plot the second set of temperature data in the same way as well. Now that I've gotten all my data plotted onto my graph, let's go ahead and go a little bit further in trying to modify this graph. So the first thing I want to do is I want to change the line colors and the line types. So this is a third input argument. I don't have to use this when I'm using plot, but I can. So this third input argument is going to be in a string form, and then I'm going to put whatever it is that I want to modify in that one string. So I can put red or blue or dashed lines, dotted lines, however I want to modify my different lines. There's a lot of other things on my plot that I want to consider. So one of the things I want to do is I want to add an x-axis label. So I'm going to use the xlabel function. Another thing I want to do is add a y-axis label. So I'm going to use the ylabel function. In addition to that, I want a title on my graph. So I'm going to use the title function. All three of these have one input argument of just a string data. So we're going to be using that character array. One thing I might want to take into consideration is the size of the plot that I'm seeing. What's the area of the plot I'm seeing? So I might want to set my y-axis limit and my x-axis limit. So I can use the ylim and the xlim functions to control that. And the input argument for those is going to be a vector. So I need to set the minimum and the maximum values. I can hard code those values in like I'm doing for the days because I'm always having 7 days in this case. Or I can use a variable. So in the case of the y-axis, just in case I change my temperature data, I might want to set it based on the data. So I can use the minimum and maximum values of my temperature data and increase or decrease those a little bit to get the frame to fit right around my data. I've already chosen different line colors and different line styles to help emphasize these different sets of data. But it might be a good idea at this point to add a legend on so I can communicate to my user or whoever is looking at this graph what my different data is. So using the legend function, it has one input argument of a cell array. So I want to create a different string for every different line and then put that all into one cell array. I could stop here. I'm very happy with my plot. It looks good. I like that I have my title, my x-axis, and my y-axis labels. I like that I've controlled the area that the user is seeing, and I have a legend. But I'm going to go a step further. So sometimes I want to highlight different points in my data and I want to tell my user a little bit more about that. So something I can do here is I can add a marker on the different points that I want to highlight to my user. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and pick the highest temperature and the lowest temperature and add an extra marker on there to highlight those. To do this, I'm going to use the same plot function that I've been using for plotting my lines, but I'm just plotting a single point. It's important when I plot a single point that I specify a marker style. If I don't specify that, I won't see anything happen because the default is a line with no markers. So I'm going to go ahead and specify which marker I would like to use. If I'm not sure, I forget all my different options with line specifications. The nice thing is I can always do doc space linespec in the command window, and then it'll pull up the line specification in MathWorks. And then I can look through this and be reminded of all my different options for my marker styles, my line styles, the colors, and a lot of other details that I can modify. To go a step further, I can even change the marker size and the line width. So I can make the marker size larger if I want to make it even more obvious on my plot. And then if it's not obvious enough, I can still even go a step further and I can change the line width. I can play around with these values some to see what these different line widths mean, to see how that's actually going to affect what my graph looks like. Now that I've further pointed to this data for my user, I might want to go even a step further and I can tell my user something about this data. So I might want to add on my graph and say specifically, here's the text about it, or like, here's the temperature in this case for the maximum and the minimum. I can have fun with this too, and I can add arrows at different places to point to my data. There's a lot of different options when I use this text function. So the text function allows me to say a specific point of where I want to put the text, and then I can say specifically what I would like in that text. And in this case, I'm going to augment a few strings together to have the text that I specifically want to display to my user. Now I'm even happier with how my graph looks. It looks great, but I've done everything in degrees Fahrenheit, and I might actually want everything in degrees Celsius also. So let's go ahead and talk about the subplot function. So the subplot function is not in replacement of the plot function. This is something in addition to. So before the plot function, I can specify subplot and say how many different figures or graphs that I want to show up on my main figure. In this case, I want to show two graphs. So I'm going to add a subplot function before what I already had for my degrees Fahrenheit graph. And now I want to do another subplot before my new code looking at degrees Celsius. If I wanted to put these two plots next to each other, then I would say I want one row, two columns, and I would want first then second position. But since I want to put them on top of each other, I'm going to say two rows, one column, and then first and second position. I have a lot of options with the subplot function to help me move around and add different graphs into one figure. In this case, again, I'm just happy with putting the two different graphs I've created so I can show to my user degrees Fahrenheit and degrees Celsius all in one figure, and I have all the same information in these two different charts. If you're wanting to stick with just an easy, simple plot, then the beginning of this video with just the plot function may be enough. But if you want to get your plot to look a lot nicer and you want to communicate more information to your user, know that you have a lot of options with the xlabel, ylabel, title, text, subplot, all these other different functions that come along with the plot function. And also remember all our line specifications. If you want more information on plotting, check out my playlist on plotting in MATLAB, or check out another one of my videos. Thank you, and be sure to subscribe so you can see my future videos.